That was Lavos, considered by many weebs to be the best villain in JRPG history. In fact, it's so memorable that no one actually knows what the hell it is, and the game's biggest mystery has remained unsolved for the last 30 years. Wait, what? Yeah, I don't know either. If you watch until the end, I promise to fully explain the entity and its connection to Lavos, but first let me break down the entire story of Chrono Trigger. So, Chrono Trigger starts off innocently enough, fun sexy times with hack scientist and local pick-me girl at the town fair, but quickly turns into a grand adventure where you save the future from a terminally fascinating time paradox with the convenient help of a friendly passing frog. More on this one in a sec. Basically, your new lady friend turns out to be the princess, and when you get sent back in time, she gets mistaken for her ancestor, the queen, who's gone missing. As a result, the search for the queen is then called off, leaving you to go find the real queen, along with the chancellor, who, upon being rescued, vows to... Okay, before we go any further, we need to stop and take a closer look at the big YouTube moment the game just drops on you in its first act, because basically everyone missed the mark on this. See, upon returning to the future, you find that the princess of the present time, again, that's your new sex friend Marl, has coincidentally also been declared missing upon entering that weird portal thing Luca made, and you've suddenly been accused of kidnapping her. Actually her, for real, no amusing cases of mistaken identity this time. And so begins the surprise meta section of the game where you, the player, your morality is put into question as you sit there and watch as everything you've done up until this moment is scrutinized under the careful eye of justice and used as a basis to prove or disprove Chrono's innocence. What's that? Instead of helping this poor girl, you went and picked up the necklace first? We see your beady little eyes shining with greed. Your date wanted candy? You couldn't even sit still for the 5 seconds it would have taken her to buy it? What a fucking cuck. Most people find this bit clever because it completely subverts your actions that you've taken up until this point. Town fair? Fun? No. This is a test of your character, bucko. Running around the festival, playing all these mini games, casually stealing other people's lunches, it takes what's supposed to be a completely safe and consequence-free introduction to the game and turns it into... what exactly? To clarify, not that this isn't an extremely clever piece of writing or that Chrono Trigger isn't a masterpiece, but let's think about this rationally for a second. First, this doesn't actually have any real consequences since the Chancellor is corrupt and throws you into jail no matter the outcome of the trial. So, womp womp, your choices don't actually matter, it just tricked you into thinking they do for a second. But also, second, I think what not enough people pay attention to is this line right here, where it's revealed that it's actually your meddling that caused the Chancellor to implement judicial reforms that are open to corruption. This would not have happened had you not taken your DeLorean for a joyride to the past, buddy. In other words, this wasn't the game turning your expectations on their head. It was a safe and consequence-free introduction to the story until you came along and ruined everything like the selfish asshole you are. Oh yeah, sure, mess with the wibbly-wobbliness of space-time and go around blaming the fucking developers instead of taking responsibility for your actions. Now, obviously this isn't something that actually changes with your actions, but then again, neither does the rest of this bit either. But it is something that's full meaning relies on this bit of meta-narrative, meaning it's Inception-level meta-narrative that most people wouldn't really pick up on. I guess what I'm trying to say is that in tricking you into thinking your actions matter, it manages to sneak in this bit about how they really do, not as in like the physical consequences of the game sense, but as in a time travel story, meta-narrative kind of... Okay, let's stop here before we start losing people and start discussing our 3 main characters. They were all designed by Toriyama, of Dragon Ball fame, one of those people whose death everyone had to capitalize on for Twitter points, and while I want to say his designs are overall excellent, there's something that's been bothering me, and that's that he definitely phoned in more than one of these fucking characters. Chrono is literally just a Dragon Ball character, only he's wearing blue instead of orange. I mean, look at him. Karate-gi, hair like a houseplant, inexplicably grouchy expression, eyes that more closely resemble ancient Roman architecture than an actual human face. I mean, I chunked this up to personal style, but if we move on to my favorite character, Luca, you can see that she's, how do I put this? Has anyone ever seen Dr. Slump? Like, I know we all praise Toriyama for being a genius and stuff, but this is literally just Arare with a different hat. I mean, I'm almost surprised he didn't give Chrono a fucking mustache to Clark Kent him the extra 5% too. So, Luca is cool with having, like, portals and robots and guns and shit, and also because she's the only character who gets all of her equipment naturally as part of her character development throughout the game. You visit her daddy and he gives you her best equipment, and then if you're a good little slut and do all your side quests, he'll give you even more better equipment, which alongside all of her magic that will just one-shot almost every enemy you will encounter makes her the best character in the game next to, well, we'll get to her. Also, she may or may not literally be God, and while I'm pretty sure the answer is no, she isn't, I reserve to change my mind later in the video if I decide and or accidentally ingest some of that Chinese factory chemical THC that Japan can't quite seem to get rid of. Speaking of writing under the influence though, the goddamn protagonist. Question, Square. Why did you make the two worst characters in the game the two main characters? Like, for one, Chrono literally doesn't have a personality. Not as in, like, the Persona 5 silent and brooding type that makes the girlies sweat in parts I didn't even realize they could, but as in, like, not only does he never speak, he fucking dies midway through the game, and the only consequence is that the most annoying character might be kind of sad. If you choose to beat the game without bringing Chrono back to life, there's a moment where all the characters start heading back to their own timelines to solve their own personal problems, and Marl is like, guys, what about Chrono? Don't you care? And it's like, literally no. Why would we? He has no personality, and if Square didn't give him goddamn half the triple text in the game, I actually think you'd be objectively better off just leaving him to die. Now that I say this out loud though, I actually think this would be better. I mean, why should I feel compelled to use a character I have absolutely no attachment to? Why does he get all the cool triple text? I wish we could say this didn't also apply to Marl, but unfortunately Little Miss I'm Not Like the Other Girls is the one they gave the haste ability to, and if you know anything about JRPGs, you'll realize this alone makes her arguably the single best character in the game next to, well, more on this later. So, let's back up. The true ending is a love story between the two worst characters, and every single one of the other main endings is about Marl chasing after him, and the game provides literally no reason to care about any of them. So, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna forget that this is a thing that happens and actually concentrate on the overall plot of the game involving Lavos because that's way more interesting, and just pretend that this is what the writers actually wanted the game to be about, but the producers insisted it would sell better if they rammed a half-ass love story into the middle of it. But back to our life of a supposed medieval fantasy crime boss, you have to break out of the prison, and again, we're given an interesting choice. We can sit there and wait for Luca to break us out, or we can pull a Wookiee and trick the guards into opening the door and catch up to Luca before fighting a robot dragon and escaping to the future, where now the real plot can begin. Rather than this fun, upbeat fantasy setting, you're suddenly thrust into a desolate wasteland covered in decrepit domes where the last remnants of humanity huddles together waiting to die. This I like a lot. It's something a lot closer to Fallout or Ergo Proxy than medieval fantasy or even Final Fantasy-esque steampunk fiction, and it's a setting I think still hasn't really been explored again by any major JRPGs. By the way, you might have noticed this before, but here it should start to really be apparent that despite being published on the Super Nintendo, Chrono Trigger has absolutely amazing sound design. Besides the howling wind sound constantly biting at your party anytime you're wandering outside, the soundtrack here is covered in this hollow metal clanking, which makes the world seem paradoxically both completely empty and also oppressing, hostile, and dangerous. So, the party sets off to find another gate back to the present, and hidden among one of humanity's long-forgotten and abandoned domes, accidentally discovers the truth of the world, which is that it is doomed to be destroyed by an all-powerful and all-consuming entity from space known as Lavos. So we'll get to what Lavos actually is and why everyone else is wrong and I'm the greatest anime critic ever, blah blah blah, but in the meantime, Lavos is a fucking amazing villain. Well, most JRPGs, hell, most games, hell, most media even is content to be like, here's bad guy, do bad thing and destroy the world. Oh no, please stop him, Mr. Hero. Oh please, I'll suck your dick. And while Final Fantasy VI with its this, but fuck you approach is still my favorite JRPG ever, I also do love Chrono Trigger's unfeeling and uncaring ball of doom slowly inching towards the planet. Well, most big JRPGs devolve into a bunch of randomly convoluted shit involving any combination of spirit energy, space aliens, and standing up to the power of God, looking at you, Final Fantasy VII, and don't get me wrong, Chrono Trigger literally still does this. Front and center of all this is the very clever, very simple, and natural fear of the unknown. It's nothing like any villain in any other media with this haunting, piercing shriek that despite playing over and over throughout the game, somehow never becomes even a little bit less terrifying. It is this primordial scream digging away at your soul, and again, I don't know how they accomplished this on Super Nintendo hardware, but this game would not be anywhere near as good without this shriek. So, Lavos is not some villain behind the curtains that comes out at the end of the game and goes, "Surprise! It was me, Dio!" It's not some asshole taunting you throughout your journey. It's this entity from space. It is just a constant, looming, ominous threat throughout the entire game, and it's not like it's just coming. It is coming in the past. But you see it arrive, and you see it land, where instead of destroying the planet, it burrows into its core. And waits, and waits, and waits. And so it's coming, but it's already here, and all you can do is wonder. I love how it's introduced here too. Marl just goes, "Hey, what's this button? Oops, here's the apocalypse." It feels both sudden, but not at the same time, as if this entire world has been hinting at some unknown disaster of the future the whole time, and, well, here it is. Surprise, motherfucker. But one of the things I like most about this is that doom and gloom as the setting is, so much so that you immediately decide you need to head back in time and hit the reset button on all of this depressing nonsense. One of the main things you do in this era is find some of the last remaining viable plant seeds and bring them back to the shelter where you get to watch them grow. This is probably my favorite theme in time travel media. See my video on Steins Gate, like this one, not one of the other 50 or 60 videos I've made on it at this point, which is the idea that if all of this will be erased, if all this, once the story is over, will never have existed, do your actions still have meaning? Maybe I'm overthinking what is honestly a pretty inconsequential part of a 20-hour video game about a giant flaming space monster that sucks all the life energy out of the planet, but this is the kind of thing that keeps me up at night, because the question this idea is actually proposing is, will these people's lives still have meaning once they cease to exist? Will they ever have meant anything, or is meaning a fleeting whimsy that only exists in the present? If so, how is the time traveler's tale any different than our own tiny, insignificant lives? Well, I'm gonna stop this here before this video gets completely derailed and go back to me saying pee pee poo poo. I like that Chrono Trigger has given the time and attention to detail to make each of its settings and characters worth thinking about, trivial as they may seem. Ahem. Sex. Okay, if I have the attention of everyone who's fallen asleep at the back of the class, we get introduced to one of the strangest characters in the game, this dude who I literally first thought was part motorcycle until I realized that his bike is just a tricycle like a fucking dork. Before picking up a passing handsome robot, more on this in a sec, head to the next gate and find yourself at a room called the End of Time. Now, I just want to say, they didn't have to make up some extremely obvious fake physics to explain how everyone got here, because, and I cannot stress this enough. No part of this statement makes even a little bit of sense, but this is at the very least interesting. Now, well, one of the cooler parts of this game's use of time travel, I really have to point out that the writers did not put enough thought into how this is described. Like, having people turn up here because of the law of conservation of time would be a cool enough idea, but for some reason they just had to state that this happens when 4 or more people try to enter, which, you know, you go here with 3 people. Also, he immediately starts saying how there have been a lot of people here recently, which sounds cool until you think about this statement for about 0.3 seconds. Anyway, it's a neat room that pretty well captures the paradoxical idea of nothing, but also something because it's a video game. It's a single room, well, plus that other thing, population 1 old man and a streetlight. It feels empty, but meaningful, which I think is exactly the vibe this kind of place needs. This is also the first point where you can directly challenge Lavos. I mean, you'll get your nuts curb stomped in faster than you can say Mamma Mia, but it does a good job properly establishing your narrative control over the story here, and is a great opportunity to explore the bad ending where Lavos wins and the world is doomed. We'll revisit the multiple endings and how they're simultaneously both extremely impressive but also pretty disappointing later, but for now, it's off to another adventure where we find these dudes worshipping a statue of Magus, creator of Lavos, and set off in search of the legendary hero who supposedly banished him to the Shadow Realm. Legendary hero? Could that maybe be our buddy Frog? If only he had the hero's sword? So, here we enter what you might know as the fetch quest section of the game, which takes you everywhere from the set of Jim Henson's The Muppet Show to the produce aisle at the supermarket. You need to find the broken Masamune, half of which is carried by Frog, while the other half is on top of some fuck-off mountain, but to repair it, you need some Dreamstone, which you can only find by traveling 65 million years to the past, which involves enlisting the help of a friendly passing cat girl, again more on this in a sec, to get your gate key back after it was stolen by a race of evil lizard people, and once you finally get all that done, you can visit Melchior, who helps create your sword. So, mid-game plot, characters, and motivations established, let's talk about the main supporting cast. Frog is my favorite character for several reasons. First is the run animation, because in contrast to the boring realism of Chrono, Luca, and Marl, Frog is this bouncy, leaping motion that reinforces the idea that actually, let's put a pin in this for a hot minute. He's the warrior, but he's like a fucking frog. And, well, most games would be like, oh, he's the missing warrior, but he got turned into a frog. No, we will not shut the fuck up and respect your intelligence for the 5 seconds it would have taken you to figure this out. And, well, that's fun and satisfying. Now, the legendary hero here actually gets shit on and dies. Frog was some dipshit kid named Glenn who hung around the warrior who was simply too fucking polite to tell him to go home. So, Glenn was a tiny little shrimp that nobody gave 2 shits about, and he got turned into some ridiculous monster that people somehow care even less about. So, what this does is create this, I don't know how. In Japanese, we would call this a gyapu, but it's the contrast between how utterly unimportant he is and his weird-ass Shakespearean way of speaking that makes him sound all serious. There's a scene later where you're given the option to let Frog confront his inner demons, take revenge on the man that took everything from him, and, well, I mean, you can. You can let Frog fight Magus, and you can kill him, and if you do, at the end of the game, you'll be rewarded as Frog finally regains his humanity and turns back into a person. But that's not how it's supposed to play out. Frog is supposed to let go of his past and forgive Magus, because whoever that young boy that got turned into a frog was, it isn't him. The man, the being known as Frog, is not that. He was born that day, and his true form is nothing more than a metaphor for the past self he left behind. And the less his outward appearance matters, the more that inner soul shines. And the ultimate symbol of this, of the distance between his 2 selves, is his real name. Because his name is simply Frog. Nothing more and nothing less. There is nothing to remember the hero known as Frog by, and while this is never explicitly stated in the game, is clearly the path he chose for himself. Of course, my first reaction to seeing this character was that the name Frog is extremely boring, generic, and forgettable, and so I immediately replaced his name with Weeb to match the goofy autist archetype and bouncy run animation that we're first presented with, promptly shitting all over all of the character development he was about to experience over the following 20 hours. Oops. I blame Square. So now, when I say completely shit all over all of Frog's character development, you can bet I also did this to Robo too when I named him Adam after Japan's most famous robot, which you might know as Astro Boy in English, you know, because Adam is like the robot. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Pluto. I talked a bit about this in my Wanikani review, but it's the first manga I read start to finish entirely in Japanese, and it's like really, really fucking good. So, Robo is this robot that you find in this derelict factory, and when Luca fixes him, he immediately gets set upon by his fellow robots that seem to think he's malfunctioning from his job of killing humans, along with his girlfriend, you can tell because she's pink, who tells us that Robo's real purpose was to infiltrate the humans, I guess because that is somehow necessary for killing them or something. Maybe don't question this part. So, the obvious question here is, where did his consciousness come from? Is he really malfunctioning? But the other, less obvious question that most people aren't considering is, does this mean that Luca somehow gave him consciousness? I mean, really think about this for a second. He was a broken robot, Luca fixed him, now he's conscious. That seems like, you know, kind of a big leap. Now, you might just be like, okay, he could have malfunctioned some other way, and also, you know, Luca giving him consciousness a lot, but it could have been why he broke down in the first place. And okay, but consider, is it important that Luca specifically is the person that fixes him? Let's come back to this. Okay, so now with Robo and Frog in tow, along with the legendary sword Masamune, we make our way to confront the Demon King Magus, who informs us that he never actually created Lavos, he merely summoned it from the center of the earth, and before he can elaborate, we're sucked into another time portal right before the arrival of Lavos 65 million years ago, which makes this as good a time as any to talk about my favorite character. I mean, like, I was gonna use Frog because I dig his whole hero's journey thing, until I realized that Isla is literally my two favorite things: cat girls being stepped on and women who are less intelligent than me. And so at our first interaction to Isla, she immediately does, and bear with me for a sec because this is an anime thing, what's called a kabedon. Now, how do I put this? This is like, there's definitely doujinshi of this moment somewhere. Not that I know because I have any, more so that I definitely don't need to look in order to tell you that they exist. Also because I did jerk off to them. Isla is, I don't want to say this makes her objectively the best character, maybe I would if this game was any kind of challenge, but she is by far the sexiest character, by which I mean she's the only one with access to the absolutely ridiculous charm ability. Charm is this game's version of Steel, which can further be boosted both with Sled's sister dual technique with Marl and goddamn lingerie. Like, actually though, that boosts your success rate by like 50%, only further leaning into the whole being stepped on by mommy vibe. And the point at which you realize you can start lifting not only several of all of the extremely broken items that are not only otherwise unique, but also you're supposed to be forced to choose between, but also motherfucking stat boost consumables that let you max out your characters well before max level, is where the entire combat system starts to grow in at the joints, if not completely break under the weight of its own imbalance. I take it back, she is objectively the best character. Anyway, like how Frog has this flowing, bouncy movement, Isla has this elegant cat-like movement, which is all kinds of confusing. I mean, they even gave her a goddamn tail. She doesn't have one, just her fucking outfit for some reason has a tail. I should clarify, confusing as in ordinarily this is the kind of thing they do to 17-year-old pop idols, not big honking mommies with an equipable bra and big step-on-me boots. Sorry, where were we? Right. So, we get to Isla's village again, only to discover that we've been foiled again by the Zuck, who has ravaged her village and taken away most of her tribe to his colonialist mansion in Hawaii. When we get there, we find the Zuck himself doing what appears to be summoning Lavos and dooming the planet to destruction. But when you defeat him, you find that they did not, in fact, summon Lavos, but were merely reacting to the knowledge of their own destruction by trying to exert some level of control over what's left of their meager existence before the arrival of their doom, sending us all the way back to square one again. And so we run into our first big question. If Magus said he summoned it, but it was coming this entire time, what did he do? If he too was sucked through the portal with you to the past, did he summon it from the past? And if so, is time circular, or is there something else going on? Was he too just exerting some sort of wishful control over his own predetermined fate? The game leaves us with both this existential question as well as our next opportunity to fight Lavos, and we realize that the gates are coming from it, the first one being its arrival in this world. And just as the first gates mark his arrival, the next gate you find brings you to no, it's not made of shortbread and catgirls, but it is the land of dreams, whose people have tapped into the infinite power of Lavos in order to bring forth a new era of magic and progress. By which I mean they're definitely on drugs, saying shit like they find truth in the bliss of sleep and beings born of dreams must return to them. Like, okay, they're John Lennon. Let's be careful not to start any more wars with China over this shit. So after spending a few hours deciphering their narcotic-fueled ramblings, you discover that they're building a new great palace at the bottom of the ocean, as close as possible to this source of energy, to hold what's known as the Mammon Machine, a device that will once again revolutionize the very fabric of society. So, you go to stop the queen and her mommy machine before she can finish accidentally summoning Lavos and dooming the world, but before you can, Prophet Wizzy McWizardson comes in and banishes you from the realm of dreams, leaving you lost in time to continue your search for the origins of Lavos and a way back so you can stop the queen before it's too late. Ironic as that sentence might be after you find a goddamn time machine. So, time machine in hand, you make your way back to the palace, and as you try to destroy the mommy machine, Lavos awakens and, surprise, surprise, fucking kills the main character of the story, which is another JRPG fourth wall breaking moment that, again, might have had somewhat more impact if you had, like, you know, any ounce of personality. Rather, it almost feels like a relief to actually get to choose the cool characters rather than having to use an anamorphic mop with a sword. So, the dream wizard, Scala, teleports you out of the palace as Lavos devours the kingdom of Zeal, before some random dude kidnaps you and brings you aboard giant airship, the Blackbird, destroying which grants you the wings of Savan and turns your time machine into a flying time machine, at which point, finally, the Ocean Palace rises from the seafloor and the endgame with all its side quests begins. The first of which is to bring Chrono back to life in a move that would later come to be known as the Kyoma Shuffle. As I mentioned, though, saving Chrono is basically pointless, so you might as well instead go have Frog's final showdown with Magus and have the game's one and only optional character join your party, because Magnus, surprise surprise, is actually the boy from Zeal who got displaced in time and became the evil demon king trying to summon Lavos in order to kill it and exact revenge. Surprise surprise, he's actually kind of a good guy, he's just really shitty at it because either he failed completely, or he succeeded and literally nothing happened because he has no more character development after you recruit him, and this is basically never ever mentioned again. So, pretty skippable too, unless you really need a blue-haired loner anime boy wizard because he's also irrelevant as a party member, what with being basically Luca, but worse. Oops. Thanks, Square. So, given that we went over basically every character at this point, it's time to turn our attention to Lavos and the single most important scene in the game, which is, for some reason, locked behind this other side quest where you need to restore some random fuck-off forest for this woman, Fiona. To do this, you need to go into a dungeon in the desert and destroy the monster, killing all the shrubbery, and then leave Robo behind for 400 years while he works to replant all the trees. Then, time traveling to the future, you find a cool 20 million trees accompanied by a church with a monument to Mr. Beast for all his hard work, and by monument, I mean it's literally just Robo, you need to go turn him on again. After doing so, the party spends a night camping out in the forest, and finally, we're given our first real discussion of the entity, so let's take a real close look at this one. With 400 more years to think, Robo has come to a realization about Lavos, that it is not responsible for the gates, and that perhaps someone or something wanted you to see all of the key events of time and space, as if some entity was reliving its past, as if the regrets of some long-forgotten being on its deathbed were flashing before its quickly fading eyes. The party begins to speculate, and Frog points out that no matter what it is, Lavos must play an important role in its life. So, who or what, if anything, is the entity? The party goes to sleep, leaving the mystery up in the air, but almost as a direct answer to this question, Luca awakens in the night to the eerie sound of a time gate, as if it were calling to her and her alone. Only this gate is special. Rather than the cold, dark blue and black, it is a bright orange and red gate, and rather than another era defined by Lavos, it takes her to a moment from her own past when her mother got caught in one of her father's machines, crippling her and forever scarring Luca. You can, and by can I mean you have about a minute to figure out how to do this, either let history play out as it was, or intervene and save her mother, preventing her from ever being crippled and soothing Luca's childhood trauma. So, obviously the question is, if this is somehow an answer to the question of the nature of the mysterious entity, and the entity has something to do with Lavos, what exactly does this scene mean? Wait, does this mean the entity is a Luca? So, let's take a sec and lay out exactly what we know about Lavos and the entity. The entity is responsible for the gates, has a desire for painful moments in time to be witnessed, is possibly dying, and has something to do with Lavos. Lavos is a space parasite that goes around from planet to planet, sucking their life energy dry, arrived on the Earth 65 million years ago, buried itself under the Earth to absorb the life energy of the planet, leaves time gates in its wake, connecting every moment it appears, had its energy harvested by the Kingdom of Zeal, who caused it to awaken and destroy the kingdom, awakened again in the year 1999, resurfacing and dooming the world to destruction, and has been raising humanity like livestock as mere prey for Lavos to feed on. Wait, what? Where did this come from? This is just dropped in the middle of the last boss fight, never hinted at anywhere else, and basically contradicts the entire rest of the game. Did Chrono Trigger just lie to us? Okay, probably not. I think the characters are just being melodramatic, but also, maybe, the writer is starting to mix up a couple different ideas here that will sort of become relevant in the later Chrono. Actually, no, this will make more sense if we just back up a sec and lay out, one by one, the possibilities for what the entity is and how it relates to Lavos. Possibility 1 is that the entity is actually just something to do with Lavos itself. I mean, think about that last line about Lavos being an alien superintelligence raising humanity like livestock. Again, that's probably just melodrama, but it clearly does influence the Queen of Zeal and possibly others like the Reptites with its power. Is it deliberately corrupting them? If so, what about the party? From everything we're told, Lavos was created by someone or something and summoned and brought here before it began to devour the Earth as an all-consuming parasite. But if this isn't the case, if Lavos was behind everything, then confronting and getting as physically close to it as possible would be where they're most susceptible, in which case, maybe the party does succumb to his mind-controlled powers and the ending of the game is just a hallucination and Lavos did destroy the entire world. While this makes complete narrative sense, it is, lame. For one thing, if Lavos was controlling everything from the start, then there is no entity at all. Lavos willed everything to happen, Lavos created the gates, and Lavos is the one that drove the Kingdom of Zeal to their own destruction. Everything is Lavos, except either some plot device broke everyone free, or Lavos somehow brought about his own destruction. But more importantly than all of this doesn't at all explain the bit about the red portal and the whole thing with dreams, so let's move on. Possibility 2 is that the entity is a meta-commentary on the game and that it's actually the player. I'm also inclined to discard this idea, as, well, this more or less explains the entity being an objective observer, you know, you literally directly overseeing every single event in the story. This doesn't explain anything about Dreams or Luca's memory here, as this isn't really relevant to the actions any of the characters take at all. Like, okay, we're observing it. But then, how does it grant Luca special portal powers to save her mother? Moving on. Possibility 3 is that it's God, which, okay, I guess it could be, but this has a few problems. One is that this entity seems less powerful than Lavos itself, and another is that this is also super lame, and also, again, Luca's portals. Possibility 4, and this was apparently outright stated by the director, but just hold on a sec, we'll get to this, is that the entity is in fact the planet itself. That it's something like Mother Nature, some primordial spirit of the planet trying to correct nature and free itself of the invading parasite. Now, for some reason, some people seem to think that the entity was a mistranslation and the actual Japanese is a lot less vague, but no. The Japanese literally refers to the entity as someone, so yes, not really more obscure. Anyway, again, if this is true, this explains absolutely nothing about Luca's red portal. Why Luca? Why here? Why this? How? So that leads directly into possibility 5, which is, and you're gonna have to bear with me for a second, this entity is actually Luca. I mean, think about it. Lavos' power is connected to dreams. The gates are being controlled by some unknown entity. Luca is constantly haunted by nightmares about her mother. Luca awakens in the middle of the night immediately after the discussion of the entity in what definitely feels like a dream, and the dream turns out to be real life, and she opens a portal to her own past, saving her mother from being crippled and finally putting her biggest regret behind her. It kind of sounds like Luca somehow harnessed the power of dreams to travel through time and save her mother, no? This idea does have one massive problem, however, which of course is why Luca? Why would Luca just randomly be god of the entire world, and the only consequence in the story is that she gets to save her mother's legs? I mean, her mom doesn't even die or anything, she just can't walk. It's traumatic, but it's not that traumatic. No, I like it, and I think it's the closest out of all the theories so far, but it's definitely missing something. And so, I think we need to go back to the idea of dreams themselves. The Kingdom of Zeal is powered by Lavos. Lavos' power comes from dreams, so I think we'll find our answer in something to do with the power of dreams. So, my proposed possibility 6, I think that maybe, and this might sound totally insane, but really so does the rest of the plot, so just hear me out, that there is no entity, or rather, there is no one entity. Instead, the entity is the power of dreams itself, rather than some entity opening portals because they want these events to be seen. It's the will of humanity itself that is opening them. This is why time portals appear with the arrival of Lavos and with every significant moment in history. It's not that Lavos is creating them, nor that some being wants these specific moments to be witnessed, just that these are the moments where humanity's will, its hopes and dreams and desire to change, where its power to dream is at its absolute strongest. So, the reason Luca is able to open a portal is not because she is God or that she alone has some unique power, but rather she merely taps into this power of dreams itself. While I joke about it not being a big trauma, if any wish has the power to disrupt time and space, it's the will of a child to save her own mother. This is why the Kingdom of Zeal rose to power as the Land of Dreams, because Lavos, being such a force of change in the universe, is deeply connected with the will of humanity, and by communing with Lavos, they were able to directly tap into the power of dreams. And this is why the people of Zeal tell Chrono and everyone else that they too possess magic, but that theirs is different, theirs is kind, and why Scala says the only difference is that the people of Zeal are under Lavos' control. Your magic and dreams are authentic and genuine, but theirs are dreams of power and greed, manufactured from the id of society with Lavos as the catalyst. Now, actually, going back to what the director said, he was saying it's like Mother Earth in this interview, but what he actually meant and what he actually says is this.
変な風に突っ込み出すとなんかスピリチュアルな方向に行っちゃうんだけど、そういうわけじゃなくて、やっぱりなんか人として誰もがなんか感じるような感覚、大自然の中でなんかどんな生き物もやっぱりずっとね、生まれてきて死んでいって、で僕たち自分たちがだからいなくなったとも、星は続いていろんな生き物はみんな続いていく中で、自分はだからその中の一部である、自分もまただからその流れの中で一体感みたいな、そういうのはなんかふとしたことで誰もが感じられるんじゃないかなとは思うんですよ。
In other words, not so much the planet itself, but rather the collective life force of every single creature living on it. Before we move on, one final thought, because I know some of you might also point out that I haven't talked at all about the sequel, Chrono Cross, or the intermediary game, Radical Dreamers. I was going on and on about the power of dreams and shit. Radical Dreamers? And, well, normally I would agree with you, yes, how novel. Perhaps the next part of the story might have more information about the story. And there is, however, one logical flaw with this line of thought, which you should probably be aware of if you've ever played Chrono Cross, which is that Chrono Cross makes absolutely no fucking sense. Seriously, it's this quirky parallel world time travel adventure story, and then halfway through the game, it just spends about a half an hour exposition dumping the most psychotic brain rot mountain of lore on you, like the writer couldn't let all of his bullshit go, and this was his compromise. You really want to know what Chrono Cross has to say about dreams? About the thing where Luca basically has the power of a god and just arbitrarily reaches through time and space on a whim one random night? Nothing. Absolutely fucking nothing. That's right, the single most interesting and important part of the Chrono Trigger plot it just completely forgets about, which, would be surprising if, again, the game didn't feel like it was written by a gang of rabid ferrets on LSD. Instead, it has this thing about the frozen flame, some legendary all-powerful thing that is some part of Lavos, and it mind controls whoever comes into contact with it, which is somehow how Lavos evolved the entire human race to be its cute little fuck slaves before being installed as a source of power to Chronopolis, yes, that is its real name, before being sealed away by the dragon god until it was uncovered that it was actually sealed up by the supercomputer Fate, yes, that is its real name, which used it as its power source to reincarnate itself because it's actually the main villain Lynx, who is also trying to steal the body of the main character. And yes, this game doesn't explain how any of this relates to what we were talking about. And yes, this is already a bigger mess of ideas than the entirety of Chrono Trigger, and yes, despite being a sequel written by the exact same person, the events of Chrono Cross are so fundamentally divorced from Trigger that if it didn't share the Chrono title, I literally wouldn't believe that these two games are even the slightest bit related, so let's just move on and leave this as the insane fucking fever dream that it is. So, possibility 7 is that Chrono Trigger is also a complete mess in that Kato Misato is and always was a total hack, and he only got away with it because Chrono Trigger, his first game as scriptwriter, did so well that afterwards they just let him do what he wanted, George Lucas style, instead of trying to impose their silly rules like narrative cohesion and logic and common sense onto his idiotic fucking stories. Sure, that line about humanity being livestock needs explaining, but I'd rather discard this as an early onset symptom of Lucasitis instead of the other way around and throw out the entire rest of the fucking game. Where were we? Right. The entity is humanity itself, I'm a genius, blah blah blah, so why was everyone so lost about this for so long? Honestly, I don't know, like, to me it seems pretty straightforward, but I guess that's the thing about stories like this. It's left as an open question which lets the imagination wander. And so people did. And I'm glad they did, because whether or not the author intended for the answer we have, stories do not belong to any one man. They belong to us. Case in point, again, fucking Chrono Cross and Star Wars. Before we go, though, if you liked this video, you'd be doing me a huge favor by stepping on that like button, and if you have any other stories you'd like to hear me explore, let me know. As always, thank you so much for your time, friends, and I'll see you in the next video.